to this edition of MedTech Emerging Minds. From Floodgate, I'm Scott Mattingly, and I'm joined today by Gretchen Heinen, the founder and CEO of AuthSnap. Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Scott. I'm excited about our conversation.
Yeah, same. And just kind of to set the stage a little bit, so I met Gretchen. We met at the American Academy of Neurology conference 2-3 weeks ago or so in Chicago. Got to spend 10 minutes or so with her on the floor, having a chat. Got to learn both about her background, and what they're doing at AuthSnap. And Gretchen, I walked away from that conversation, very impressed with just you as a person, your background, your energy, your passion for the space that you guys are making an impact in. But then two, what you're doing to use technology with AuthSnap and really help try to solve a problem that's very common for a lot of people. So very excited to get into that and help our listeners out there and followers of Floodgate learn more about how you're impacting lives.
That's awesome. I'm excited too.
Yeah, no, great. So kind of with that, before we dive into AuthSnap and kind of that side of things, I'd like for our listeners to get to know you a little bit. I know, you started your career as a bedside nurse and as a case manager. And so kind of tell us a little bit about that. What was it like working on the front lines of healthcare? And then, what drove you to make the leap from that to founder?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. So yes, I've been a nurse since 2009. And so my nursing career has spanned through the H1N1 pandemic, through COVID, and really, throughout that time, I worked on all the units of every hospital. A lot of the time I was working in the case manager or utilization review type role. And what that means is then I was sitting at the bedside with the patient, trying to solve complex problems alongside of the medical team and making sure that that patient leaves the hospital or health system or clinic with a plan that they can be successful in. And so sometimes that was helping people figure out who's going to care for them at home. Do they need to go to a skilled nursing facility? Do they need to go to acute rehab? I worked on the trauma units. I worked in the ER. I worked on all the med-surg floors, telemetry. So I really saw the whole hospital. And throughout that, span of a little more than a decade in that situation, what I saw is a lot of patients suffering, dying, or having delays because of boxes that aren't checked on insurance paperwork. And most of the time, these patients, the decision the doctor was making is clinically appropriate, and this is the right care for the patient. But because everything in life has to have rules, insurance companies have guardrails and rules also. So if a patient doesn't perfectly match the boxes on the forms, it doesn't mean that patient shouldn't get the care. It just means that care needs to have more adjudication around whether it should be paid for. And unfortunately, that takes time and energy and effort. And when you're a busy hospital that's short-staffed, a lot of times that doesn't happen. So those patients just either don't get the care or the hospital doesn't get paid. Both of those scenarios are horrible outcomes, right? Because if a hospital is doing care and not getting paid, they're going to close their doors. And if a patient isn't getting care, then they're just getting sicker. So whether you look at it from the standpoint of the patients were suffering or the hospital are suffering, they both were. And that's the problem that we set out to solve.
Yeah, no, it's kind of crazy to think that is a problem that still exists, right? And obviously it's a serious one. Can you maybe expand just a little bit and paint a picture for the audience on just kind of broad scale, like how serious is that problem, just kind of holistically? What does a denied claim really mean, at the end of the day for a patient?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's just take the biggest picture, the whole United States, right? So in the entire United States, every single year, there are roughly $262 billion worth of claims that are unpaid. So that's the dollar amount total of those claims. Now, we know there's, 350 plus million Americans in the United States. So typically every person is going to experience this. I've actually had 2 denied claims myself this year. So it's like, ironic. The person who does this work is still getting denied claims. And So every American is really going to be touched by this at some point, whether it's your child, yourself, your mother, your father, your sister. They will have a situation where their medical circumstances fall outside of a guardrail or a box on an insurance form. And then because of the way the system works, it'll just automatically get denied. So for all of us, this will impact all of us. And roughly about $19 billion a year is spent just managing these claims, communication back and forth between the insurance company and the providers, the patients. I mean, if you think about what we could do with $19 billion if we helped solve this problem, there's a lot of reallocation of operational budgets that could go back into these hospitals and help these patients. It could go into staffing, it can go into giving people raises and solving the problem of shortages, which I know you know all about, with what you guys do. And additionally, about 13 and a half hours per position per week is spent on just dealing with this problem. That's not seeing patients or charting or administering care. It's literally on paperwork with the insurance company. So if you are a physician or a provider and you are already working 40, 50, 60 hours a week seeing patients, imagine adding 13 and a half hours, every week on top of that just to deal with paperwork. They call this pajama time for physicians, where they're working in their pajamas at night. And it causes significant burnout for providers. It causes them to leave the field of medicine. It causes rural hospitals to close because they don't have enough operating capital to stay open. And then, of course, I already mentioned what it does to the patient. So it really touches every area of healthcare, because it doesn't matter how well advanced we are in our technology or in our trained physicians and providers. If we don't have someone to pay for the care cannot be delivered.
Sure. Yeah. No, the pajama time, it kind of reminds me of like a teacher at home at night grading papers or something, yes. Right? After school is done. Why do you, I'm sure you've, definitely figured out a few reasons, but why do you think it's been such a hard problem to fix up until this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's actually what led us to start AuthSnap, is because of how hard it is to fix it. Because a lot of times for these patients, the problem isn't a mathematical equation or a simple algorithm. For example, a simple algorithm is the doctor used the wrong CPT code. So all you have to do is rebill it with the corrected code, right? That's a pretty simple type of denial. In a lot of the cases, though, it requires clinical judgment in order to justify to the insurance company why this patient needed what they did. So a lot of my career was spent reading about 100 pages of clinical per patient, and that is not an exaggeration, and then writing a letter to the insurance company that included what the story of the patient was, what happened, why those boxes didn't get checked, what the insurance policy promises this patient, what the federal rules say, like CMS rules, what state regulations say that this patient should have, and then peer-reviewed literature that justifies why this patient should have gotten what they want, what they are requesting. For example, maybe the medication doesn't meet the requirements, but we have 15 studies that say this medication is the best medication for this patient, and these other medications won't work because of XYZ. So to solve this problem using technology, the technology has to think like a clinician. And up until a few years ago, with the emerging of agentic AI and large language modeling processing, we really didn't have an ability to create software that could think like a human. And so the technology has shifted quite a bit. And we saw this coming when we started the company 3 years ago. We saw that this was like on the horizon, and that's why we said, this is the right time to build this, because by the time we build this and we bring it to market, we are going to be in the exact place we are right now, where we can use technology to solve a problem that previously you could only use with a human brain.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Was there a specific aha moment when you were like, okay, we can do this?
Yeah.
This is.
Yeah, there was. So,
This is actually doable. This is, this is not just, a dream. Like, we can actually make this a reality kind of moment.
yeah, that's a really good question. So, well, it started with me quitting my job. Way before we started the company. I had gotten to the point in my nursing career where I knew that I knew that the path I was on was not the right path. And I needed a little space in my brain to be able to figure out what that next thing was going to be. And so I quit my job. And then, a time period later, I started thinking and researching the stuff that really bothered me in healthcare. And this, of course, bothered me very much in healthcare because I saw it over and over. I experienced patients who, especially in oncology, where the delay of care is so important, right? Because cancer will continue to grow with a delay in care. It was an area that I had had so many patients where the outcomes had been poor because of this problem. And I just really sought out to do a lot of research on it. I looked at how big is this problem in the United States? How are people solving it right now? And I sat my husband down and, well, then I called a couple engineers that I knew. And I'm like, hey, I have this idea, sign this NDA. Can this be built? And after talking to maybe, 4 or 5 different engineers who I trusted, who were my friends, they were like, yes, that can be built. So great. Okay. I know this can happen now. And I sat my husband down and I said, hey, listen, here's my idea. I had a deck he was like my first key stakeholder, right? I had a deck all prepared. And I was, I said, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how big the industry is. This is what I think the impact could be, yada, yada. Showed him the deck. And I said, in order for me to solve this problem, we're about to go on a very long, hard journey. Okay. This is not an easy industry. There's going to be a lot of people who aren't going to believe that we can do this because what we're doing is totally different than how this problem is solved now. I'm probably not going to make any money for a few years while I'm building this, right? Because I'm going to be investing money into it. And it's probably going to be the hardest thing we ever do. So if you're not on board, we won't do it. Okay. But if you are on board and I have your support and we can do this as a team, I mean, he's not in the company in any way, but I just needed to, my personal life had to be a certain situation in order for this to work. And he came back and he's like, let's do it. I think you should do it. I think this will work. Go for it. And so then our next call was an attorney. And I'm so glad this was our next, this is turning into a startup story, but I'm so glad that we did actually contact an attorney first because we set ourselves up for success right from the gate. So, I mean, and then from there, it was just adding team. It was finding the right people who had the right skill sets. And we have a very diverse team, of several dozen people now. So.
Yeah. What made you kind of believe that technology, AI, things like that, where we are now, had the capability to solve the problem? You touched on a little bit. You said, where the time seemed right of kind of where things are. Expand on that piece a little bit of why now, from a technological standpoint, is it the right time when, clearly this has been something that's been going on and insurance companies have been struggling with for a long time.
Yeah. Well, so I was an early adopter of ChatGPT. I was, one of the first, users when it first came out. And, I'm an avid X user. So if you're on X, you're kind of getting more up to date on what's coming out in MedTech. And I had started becoming interested in the whole MedTech world, several years prior to this, because I knew that some of the problems that bothered me about my nursing career were technology related and technology barrier related. So when I saw early on what ChatGPT and OpenAI were doing in 2022, I mean, that, it sort of just sparked it took my nursing brain into the engineering world where I was like, wow, we're about to head into somewhere that's totally different than where we've been. So I think being an early adopter of technology and being curious about technology, but also researching everything that was out there. Most technology that you want to use in healthcare requires IT integration, IT road mapping, cybersecurity, backlogs, and, tons of due diligence. It's usually a 12 to 24 month procurement. So it's a really big deal for a hospital or health system to even use any type of technology for revenue cycle, because the IT lift is so heavy. And what we wanted to build is something that anybody could use. A doctor in nowhere America could use our tool. A rural hospital about to close could use our tool. A huge health system could use our tool. So we built it totally different than how everybody builds their software. And we custom built it ourselves. I mean, we made sure we had some of the best engineers right out of the gate. And so the way that we went after the problem is clinically, not engineering. And that's where I think the difference between us and some of our competitors or some of the other players out there is they're trying to solve like an engineering problem or math problem, and we're actually solving a clinical problem. And so the combination of making it a tool that's completely cloud-based and can be used by anyone anywhere, plus a clinical engine that's really like a human brain inside of it, those are the two things that really, I think, set us apart from the other technology and why I think this is going to be such a disruptor.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, and I think that's where the importance of you having so much experience as a clinician and being the one that said, okay, I'm gonna solve this problem. I'm gonna start this company with your background knowledge and made it kind of a bottom driven up type solution, I think is so important, instead of, making the solution first and then trying to make it fit the problem. You tailored it to what you knew was the problem. And I think that has obviously, served you guys well. So let's kind of get into how AuthSnap works a little bit. Talk us through that. I understand that what used to be a long process and a claim, you brought it down to 5-10 minutes in certain circumstances. How does the AI make that possible? What does it produce on the other end? Just kind of dive a little more into what exactly is going on kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah. So to tell you what's going on, I have to kind of share with you how we've been doing it, because I think the context is important. So in almost every circumstance, even for hospitals who have a revenue cycle company who is caring for them, meaning they're either outsource the whole revenue cycle or they outsource pieces of it. In almost all circumstances across the United States, even today with our technology where it's at, they still do a portion of their denials manually, meaning a nurse opens a chart, reads a bunch of stuff, and writes an appeal letter. That is still done majority across the board, even at the top systems, okay? So they might say they're using AI, but in almost all cases, there is a nurse that is interacting with some of these appeals. Not all of them, but the ones that we're talking about here today. Mm-hmm. That is the problem that I saw no other technology was solving, because it requires so much human intervention. And so what we did is we built something that we have a patent on, where you can take a chart and you can upload the patient chart, whether it's handwritten notes, a download from Epic, doesn't matter what EMR you're using or what billing system you're using, but you take the patient encounter, literally imagine like it getting fed into a machine. I mean, virtually, of course, right? And that is taking all of the information in there and then spitting out an appeal letter within 5 minutes. Now, what happens inside of there, I can't talk about too much because that's part of our patent, right? So, but the outcome is a appeal letter that is specific to the patient, the policy, the payer, peer-reviewed articles, the state regulations, federal regulations, how I think about it as a nurse, how my chief medical officer thinks about it as an attending physician when he walks into the patient room. It factors in every day of the patient encounter, all the nuances between every day, and then societal guidelines. And so that really is what helps these letters to be successful. And so, then we hand the appeal letter back to the provider and they submit it. Now, there's lots of different scenarios about how that goes on, right? Depending on a system. But at the basic level, we're putting in information, we're spitting out an appeal letter, we're handing it back, and it takes about 5 to 10 minutes. If it's a big system or it's a group purchasing order or it is some of the marketplaces, they're going to look different, right? Because we're going to use different levels of technology and APIs in those situations. Some of the larger health systems, they want a little bit more integration. But at the most basic level, that is what it is doing.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Who are your primary customers today? And then what kind of results are you seeing with them in the field?
Yeah, so outpatient specialty clinics, rural health systems, there are a few larger health systems that, there's some stuff happening there, and there's some stuff we're under NDA with that I can't talk about that is like the big dogs and some of the bigger RCM type situations. But what we're finding is that the approval overturn rate, meaning the times that the insurance company pays the claim, can go from the industry average of 60% all the way up to like the mid 80s. And so you can improve the overturn rate, meaning you get paid on these claims significantly, 10, 20 points, because you're actually, when you're relying on a human to write these letters, whether the person's writing at 8 a.m. after a fresh cup of coffee or the last case of the day at 4 p.m. when they just want to go pick up their kids. This is a real life situation I was in where my kids had to be picked up at daycare and I had a few letters left. And I didn't treat those the same as the ones at the beginning of the day. Okay. And so, the accuracy is one of the best pieces of the technology. And then also, we always say we're not replacing humans, we're giving them leverage, because these nurses are not going to be unemployed. Okay. We do not have enough nurses to be laying off nurses. Okay. That is never going to happen in our current situation. But what will happen is that nurse will now have a lot more capacity to do other things, work on things that actually improve the health system with her top of license knowledge. So rather than reading a bunch of clinical all day, she can kind of scan through the appeal letters to make sure they're ready to go out the door. And then the rest of her day that she was spending reading clinical, she can be like interacting into the different improvement processes happening at the hospital or at the bedside. I mean, there was many things I had ideas about when I was doing this work that I was like, gosh, if we could only do this for the patient, or I have this idea about how we could progress care better, but no one could ever tap into that side of me because I needed to be a doer, right? I was a producer at the my production kept the doors open, so that part of my brain that had all these ideas was never tapped into. That's what we really want to get to, is that point.
Yeah, no, I love that. Leadership side of things, kind of get into you a little bit. Building a startup in healthcare, brutally hard. We see it all the time here because a lot of our clients are, startup, small, medium-sized type companies. What's been your biggest challenge, if you had to kind of nail it down a little bit, getting AuthSnap off the ground, and kind of what has it taught you about yourself, just as a founder, as a CEO, as a leader?
Oh man, we could probably talk for 4 hours about this. I will say there was a large learning curve going from being a bedside nurse, if that's what you want to call it, a nurse in the hospital, to being a CEO of a C corporation. I had to get an MBA overnight on the streets of YouTube and through the help of others. And so there was a lot that I needed to learn about how to lead people, how to get a team rallied together, how to make sure everybody's on the right seats on the bus, and, even just down to small things like who's going to answer the phone, and, how are we going to get capital, and, should we take money from this VC or this VC? So for me, I think one thing that helped is just always being curious and really trying to make sure there was no ego in the situation. It was surrounding myself with a lot of smart people, trying to respect people the best that I can in their zone of genius, putting them in the right places, and knowing that there is no way that this will ever come to life by myself. I mean, that there's just no way. So I just really try to surround myself with people who are way smarter than me, who are way farther along than me in life. And I just stay curious. And that is like the best advice I could ever give someone, is just be open. And I love quotes that are all about, not trying to be right all the time, but just being willing to change your mind. Just yesterday, I disagreed with something my COO was doing. And he explained it to me, and I said, you know what? You've changed my mind. I see your perspective. I see what you're saying. I agree with you now. And it took 5 minutes to resolve something that probably other companies spend like months arguing about. Right. And so it's just being open, I guess.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's fantastic. You hit a lot there. And like you said, we could spend a couple hours just talking about leadership probably, and deep dive each one of the things that you just said. But one of those key things that you just pointed out is building the right team around you. And I think that's super important. I'm glad you pointed that out. From kind of circling back, I can probably go online right now and I can find 100 articles within 5 minutes talking about how AI is going to improve things, and then I can go find 100 that talk about how AI is going to ruin everything. Have you met within kind of the healthcare industry? Have you met some skepticism from folks and pushback on the AI piece? And we talked a little bit, right? Like everybody's afraid that AI is going to replace jobs and go beyond just being a tool to make things more efficient. But have you met skepticism or resistance on the AI side of things? And then, how have you kind of addressed those with customers or clients? And, reassure people, I guess, that humans are still going to be in the loop.
Yeah, gosh. Okay. So this is actually a really interesting question, because in 2023, when we first started, we avoided using the word AI because we found there was not enough early adopters that trusted it at that time for us to be successful using that term. So we used data science. That's the word we used. Everything on all of our marketing materials said data science because everyone was comfortable with that word, even though it was exactly the same thing as AI. And AI has been around since 1956. The term was coined at Dartmouth. I have a picture of myself standing next to the plaque where they had their little summer camp and decided to use the word artificial intelligence in 1956. And, we've been using AI in Microsoft products for decades. Like if you search someone's name in your Outlook to find their email, that's AI, right? But we, as a healthcare society, have not caught up to the vernacular. And so we avoided using the word because people didn't really understand what the word even meant. And then we came back around and started using it again in 2025 because now it was like the buzz. And then in 2026, it needed to have human in the loop attached to the word because everyone wants human in the loop AI. We have not changed our process in any way throughout those 3 years. It has been the exact same way, but it's what people are most comfortable adopting. And this is actually, I'm glad we're having this conversation because this is what I believe is the root of all of healthcare problems is our speed to adoption in healthcare. And I actually give a talk called how to choose the right AI partner. And I talk about how to take your organization and pick apart how it is as a culture, where you're at clinically, where you're at from a process standpoint, and how to choose different AI solutions for the different parts of your hospital. I don't even talk about AuthSnap in that talk. I don't want it at all to be about us because it's more to me, I think the education that we need to be helping health systems with is how do we adopt anything faster in healthcare? Why does it take 52 meetings to make a decision on something? Why does it take 24 months? Most of the time, a product is a totally different thing after 24 months. So if we're waiting 24 months to decide if we want to partner with an organization, there's probably 5 that are better than that organization by that point. But now we have to start back at the beginning with the procurement and the RFPs. And so we have to shrink this window in healthcare to be moving at all in any direction, regardless of its RCM or how doctors do their jobs or how nurses start IVs. And that to me is like the real problem that we need to be solving. And so I'm interested in any organization, any work group, any alliance or whatever you want to call it that I can join to help health systems move faster. That is the real problem that we need to solve, whether we call it AI or human in the loop or whatever.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I love everything that you're saying. Where do you see AuthSnap going? What's next?
Yeah, so we are already making a huge name for ourselves in the industry. And I really, really believe that within the next 12 to 24 months, everyone will know about AuthSnap because the way that we're doing this is so different. We're catching a lot of attention. And so our goal as a company, and going back to what you said about leadership and hiring a team, every single person on our team is hired for 2 reasons. Number 1, their passion to solve the problem. And number 2, are they a cool person to hang out with? Everything else we figure out. Okay. If you need to be a better engineer, I'll send you to school. If you need to be a better leader, I'll send you here. If you need help on learning Outlook, we'll figure that out. But if you're a cool person to hang out with and you care a lot about solving this problem, you're right for our team. And that has done me right. Okay. That's probably not in any book about how to hire, but that has done me right. And I stick by it. But AuthSnap really is a group of people who are very, very passionate about seeing this problem be solved, because we believe this is truly what has to happen in America's healthcare. I also believe that when you do that, when you solve a problem at a very big scale with passion, the dollars will follow. You don't have to worry about the money. The money will figure itself out. And, we have lots of smart CFOs and people helping with our pro formas, because of course, as a nurse, that is not my best suit. I mean, I'm proficient at it now, but definitely I would not put myself in the CFO spot at this company. Nor would I put myself in the engineering role, right? But we really, our next, the next thing you're going to be seeing is you're going to be seeing places who are using AuthSnap all over the place. RCM companies, large players, small hospitals, it will be everywhere. And that's really where we're going. And then beyond that, time will tell.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, you said something there that sounded very similar to one of the best leaders I ever had in the military. He was like, it's pretty simple. Take care of people and be a good dude. That was his advice to me like 10, 15 years ago or so. So maybe you and I need to start another podcast called just Take Care of People and be a good human or something like that. And make it our leadership podcast. For any nurses, clinicians, women founders, things like that are out there listening, folks who are in that situation where they're sitting on an idea, they're afraid to act, what would be your advice to them?
Well, okay. So I just said this to somebody about 2 hours ago. What's the worst that can happen? That's what I would have them ask themselves. Literally, what is the worst that can happen? That's what I asked myself when I started this company. And when I answered that question, the worst that could happen is I'm out a couple $100,000 or more, maybe, right? But there's always opportunity to make more money. And I'm working in the same job that I'm doing currently. That's my worst case scenario, is my exact situation with a little bit of debt. Okay. How many Americans live with a little bit of debt? Right? Like probably almost all of us. And so for me, the worst case scenario was actually my current reality. So what does it hurt to just try? Right. And so that's what I would say to somebody is, lay out your worst case scenario. And if it's your current situation, you have nothing to lose.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. Where can, if people who are out there who are listening to this, interested in AuthSnap, where can they go to learn more? Obviously the website, any other places you think are valuable to kind of learn more?
Yeah. So I think honestly, we created a company name that would be unique. And so it's, AuthSnap is short for authorization. So AUTH in a snap, like snapping your fingers. And so, if you Google us, you'll find our website. You can book a demo straight on there. If you're a provider, you can connect with us on there. I'm very active on LinkedIn about all of these things we've been talking about here today. I really want to bring realness back into these types of roles, CEO roles, because I know for me, when I first started, I had a lot of insecurity about being myself online, because I felt like I had to be this polished CEO version of myself who did not exist at the moment. And I still feel like I'm real and I'm myself, but maybe a little bit more refined than I was a few years ago. But I just really want to bring humanity back to building companies, and especially in healthcare, because I think we have a new generation of healthcare leaders who are coming up, and they don't tolerate the same things that the Gen Xers, they are not willing to have any kind of smoke and mirrors, and they want things to be real. I love the new generation of leaders coming up. I think it's exciting where we're headed with them and their ability with technology. So find me on LinkedIn is the short answer.
Okay, great. Gretchen, again, I could keep going on, but thanks so much for joining us today. What you guys are doing to improve lives, I think, is super important. I think your approach to being a CEO, I have no doubt we would have a great conversation from our 10-minute or so interaction that we had in Chicago. Knew that we could have a great conversation and hit it off, and hopefully, maybe we'll do it again sometime. But very, very thankful for you coming on today and letting us learn more both about you and about AuthSnap. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's great.
Okay, bye.